Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another day of Vlogmas. Today I'm going to be talking about quite a few authors that I would like to read more by. So I have compiled a list of authors who I want to read more by, and I want to use this list as a kind of inspiration slash challenge for 2019. I don't intend to read something new by all of these authors because there are 28 of them in 2019, but I do think that I might try and read like one book a month or 12 books over the whole of the year that is from or by one of these authors. Basically, I wanted to put together for myself a list of authors who I have enjoyed in the past, who I might enjoy again. A list of authors that I can go to when I'm stuck for what to read, or inspiration for what I would like for Christmas, and things like that. So what I did is I went through Goodreads and looked at all the authors whose books I had given 5-star ratings to. Some of these authors I've read tons by and feel like I'm well on track to read everything by them, or that I've read a decent amount by them. But some of the authors whose books I've given 5 stars to in the past, I've either only read 1 or 2 books by, or I've read quite a few books by, but not for several years. So what I did is compiled this list. So every author on this list is either an author who I've only read 1 or 2 books by, 1 or both of which I gave 5 stars, or they're authors who I've read several books by, but not for quite a long time. And all of these are authors who have more books that I can read. Some of them I've read 1 book by and I loved it, and they've only got 1 other book, but I'd like to read that. And some of them have written an awful lot of books and I've barely skimmed the surface of what they've written. Now, there aren't going to be any Victorian authors on this list because I made in Victober a video called my long-term Victorian literature TBR, where I went through a lot of Victorian authors who I want to read more by, and I pretty much covered everyone I would talk about here in that video. So I'll link that down below if you want to hear some more Victorian writers who I'd like to read more by. But I thought I would talk about some non-Victorian writers today who I want to read more by. So I'm going to divide this video into sort of classics and non-classics. Most of the classics are 20th century, though not all of them are, and I'll go through the classics in alphabetical order by author and then the non-classics. There are 28 authors, so I'm going to try and make this fairly quick, and I will tell you what I've read by them, what I might read in the future, and why I liked their work so far. So, first author on my list is Ray Bradbury. I read Fahrenheit 451 last year, the year before, at some point in the last couple of years, and really loved it, and just haven't picked up anything by him since. But I do have Dandelion Wine sat on my shelf, which I've heard brilliant things about. I've owned this for about a year, but I still haven't read it yet, so hopefully I will get to this in 2019. I loved his writing in Fahrenheit 451, and I know that this is very different. It's not speculative dystopian, it's sort of about his childhood, a fictionalised account of Ray Bradbury's childhood, but it sounds interesting. I love his writing and I'm really looking forward to it. The next author on my list is Anita Brookner. Last year I read A Start in Life by her and absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed the writing style, found it really rich and engaging and interesting. And I hadn't really heard much about Anita Brookner before. The only reason why I read this book is because I was sent a review copy by Penguin Essentials when they were bringing out this new kind of series of editions of modern classics, and I really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to read more by her. I'm not very familiar with her work in terms of where to go next. I hear Hotel de Lac might be good, and I certainly know my mum has some books by Anita Brookner on her shelves, so I'll certainly be raiding her shelves at some point and borrowing one of them, because I really enjoyed this and I definitely need to read more by her. Next I have Daphne du Maurier. I have read 2 books by Daphne du Maurier, both of which I read this year. Earlier on this year I read Rebecca, and I also read My Cousin Rachel. I loved both of these so much. I can't believe it took me so long to discover Daphne du Maurier. The writing is so rich and atmospheric and wonderful. The mysteries and the plot so exciting and dramatic. I know I have to read more by her. I don't know where to go quite next. I've heard really good things about Jamaica Inn, but I also watched the beginning of the television adaptation of it and really didn't like it, so I feel like maybe that's not the place I should go next. I don't know, but certainly I need to pick up more Daphne du Maurier in the future because I loved her work so much, and I'm sure I will end up getting round to something of hers next year. The next author on my list is Ian Forster. I've read 2 books by Ian Forster. I read Howard's End at university. In fact, I think I read it twice because I studied it on one of my modules and wrote an essay on it, and I absolutely loved it. It then took me many years, about 5 years, to pick up another book by him, but earlier on this year I read Maurice, which I absolutely loved, and I really fell back in love with Ian Forster's writing style, so I know I want to read more by him in the future. I don't entirely know where. Nick has a copy of A Passage to India sat on his bookshelves, which I might borrow at some point, and I also know that my dad is a big fan of Ian Forster, so I need to ask him where I ought to go next. I'm really excited to read more Ian Forster because I find the Edwardian period in history really interesting, and a lot of his books are written around that time, and also because I just loved Howard's End and Maurice so much, especially especially the way they kind of look at class and romantic relationships, and I can't wait to read more by him. Next on the list I have L.P. Hartley. I read The Go-Between a couple of years ago and absolutely adored it. I really fell in love with this book. I thought it was incredible and just fantastic, and I've just never picked up anything by him since. In fact, I don't even know the name of anything else that L.P. Hartley had written. I think the only reason why I ever got this book and why I read it was because it was in the like collector's library editions, and I was collecting the old stripy designs when they used to do them. I have quite a lot of them, as you can see, and so I ended up getting this because it was one of that edition, and then I read it and absolutely loved it, but I just haven't read anything else by him, and I know very little about the rest of his work, so I need to do some research and find out where to go next, but I definitely want to read some more by L.P. Hartley at the moment because The Go-Between was so fantastic. Next on my list I have Victor Hugo. Now, it's been a very long time since I read Victor Hugo. The only book I've read by Victor Hugo is Les Miserables, which is obviously one of his most favourites, and I read that when I was about 15 or 16, and I loved it. It was one of my favourite books as a teenager. I can't say that I remember it well enough to know whether it was one of my favourite books now, but I still highly value it and remember some passages, though not all of it, very well. I absolutely loved it. And I bought The Hunchback of Notre Dame after that, or was given it as a present, I can't remember, but it's been sat on my shelf for a very long time and I haven't read it yet, and I really need to, and I keep not doing so. It's been on several TBRs on my channel, and I don't know, maybe when I finish War and Peace I feel like the time will come, which is happening. I'm about halfway through War and Peace, so I will actually finish it, and after that The Hunchback of Notre Dame might be my big translated large classic. It's not nearly so long as Les Miserables, so why it's taken me so long to get around to it I don't know, but this I really need to read, and more by Victor Hugo in general, because I loved Les Miserables so much, and it was really like French Dickens. I mean, you know, with lots of difference and nuance, but that blend of humour and misery, it's what I like in a classic. Next I have Iris Murdoch. No books to show you for her, but I read Under the Net at university. I studied it on one of my modules and I loved it. Don't remember it very well now, but I loved it at the time, and I just haven't read anything else by her since, and I don't know why. So Iris Murdoch is definitely on my list. I've heard good things about The Sea. That's probably one of her most famous ones, so that might be the one that I reach for at some point, or else I might just see what my library has that is by Iris Murdoch, because I loved Under the Net and I definitely need to read more by her. Next, Anthony Powell. Bet you didn't expect to see him on here. So I have read 12 books by Anthony Powell, and I'm currently rereading those 12 books, that series, A Dance to the Music of Time. But that is all I've read by him. And although there are 12 books in the series A Dance to the Music of Time, really it's one story. It's kind of like one giant book. And I haven't read anything else by him, although A Dance to the Music of Time I consider my favourite series of books ever, and like one of my favourite works of literature of all time. I've just never picked up any of the rest of his work. So after I finish the Dance to the Music of Time read-along in, I think, March or maybe February, we're due to finish, I really need to pick up something different and something new by Anthony Powell, because he's such a brilliant writer and I love his writing style so much, but I haven't read anything apart from that main famous series, and he wrote so many other books as well. I especially hear good things about Oh, How the Wheel Becomes Him, I think that's what it's called. So that might be next on my list, and just more by Anthony Powell. I definitely need to read more of his work. Next I have Barbara Pym. I read Excellent Women last year, maybe the year before, and really loved it. I thought it was a fantastic, engaging, wonderful book. I really loved her writing style. Could definitely see why I have heard her called the 20th century Jane Austen, although I think there's a bit more like bitterness and less happy endings of Jane Austen going on in Excellent Women. It's a wonderful book, and she's a really interesting 50s writer, but I haven't read anything else by her since I read this. I know Nick really likes her work as well, and he's just read Jane and Prudence, which he said was really good, so that's probably next on my list for Barbara Pym, and I really just want to read more by her because I did enjoy Excellent Women so much. Next, Jules Verne. Earlier on this year, me and my boyfriend Nick listened to Around the World in 80 Days on audiobook while we were on holiday, and I loved it so much. It was absolutely fantastic. One of my favourites this year. Really enjoyable and engaging and so interesting and fun and brilliantly written, very funny, but also just like really heartfelt and lovely as well. So I definitely must read more by Jules Verne, and I think probably next on my list might be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Journey to the Centre of the Earth, but he wrote so many, and so many that are well known, so do let me know if you have any recommendations for where I should go next with Jules Verne, and I'm really excited to read more by him. Next on my list is Evelyn Waugh. Now I have read quite a lot by Evelyn Waugh. Let's have a count. I've read A Handful of Dust, Decline and Fall, Vile Bodies, Brideshead Revisited, Scoop, War in Abyssinia, The Loved One, and I think I might have read another one that I've forgotten. The majority of those books I read at university. I think the only book I've read by Evelyn Waugh in the last 4 years is The Loved One, and all the rest of them I read while I was at university. In fact, while at university, I did a whole module on Evelyn Waugh, a whole module, a sixth of my final year of university was dedicated to Evelyn Waugh, and I think I just got a bit Evelyn Waugh'd out, especially because I do have a slight love-hate relationship with Evelyn Waugh. I love Vile Bodies, I think it's one of the best books ever. Bryce had Revisited, I'm not so fussed about, and sometimes I both really simultaneously enjoy and get angry at Evelyn Waugh books, but it's been a really long time since I've read anything by him, and it's such a shame because actually I did enjoy a lot of his books, and I found them really like historically interesting, even when they sometimes frustrated me. So Evelyn Waugh is definitely an author I need to read more by in future. I need to get back into reading more of his work, and I'm sure I will discover some others like Vile Bodies, like A Handful of Dust, that I absolutely adore and can't wait to read again and again. Finally, on my classics section, I have John Wyndham. I read The Chrysalis last year and really enjoyed it, but that's the only thing I've read by him, and I definitely need to read more. I'm not sure where I want to go next. Maybe Day of the Triffids. I hear quite a lot about that one, but I feel like I want to read some of the less like scary alien invasion-y ones, and some of the more like psychological, complicated society dystopian ones like The Chrysalis. So I don't know, let me know your John Wyndham recommendations down below, that would be very helpful. Now, onto the contemporary authors I need to read more by. First on the list I have Kate Atkinson. I have read two of her books before. I read Life After Life and Not the End of the World and Other Stories. I love Life After Life. I read it several years ago and completely fell in love with the writing style, adored it so much, had such a brilliant time reading it, and then I read Not the End of the World a little bit after that, and it fell a bit flat for me. I didn't love it at all, and I think that's just kind of put me off, and I haven't read anything else by Kate Atkinson since. But I really should, because I loved Life After Life so much. It's a 5-star read for me, one of my favourites, and I really just need to read more by her. So the one I have sat on my shelf is God in Ruins, which is slightly related to Life After Life. I think it follows one of the characters from Life After Life, so I definitely need to try and read that at some point. I keep on putting it up on TBRs and not actually getting around to reading it, so hopefully in 2019 I will. And I'm also really interested in her new novel Transcription, which just sounds fantastic. I then also want to read more by Jo Baker. I read Longbourn earlier on this year for Jane Austen July and absolutely loved it. It was a really brilliant Pride and Prejudice retelling, and more than anything I loved the writing, and just aside from the Pride and Prejudice-ness, it was a brilliant historical fiction novel. Now Jo Baker has written a lot of other books, none of which are anything to do with Jane Austen, but all of which sound really interesting. She's an author I definitely need to read more by. If you've read anything else by Jo Baker apart from Longbourn, please do let me know, because I'd love to dive into the rest of her work. Next on my list I have Sebastian Barry. I read Days Without End earlier on this year, and it's definitely been one of my favourite reads of the year. It was a really brilliant, engaging, wonderful historical fiction novel, beautifully written with such an engaging narrative voice and so powerful and moving. I definitely want to read more by Barry in the future. I do in fact have on my shelves The Secret Scripture, which has been on my shelves for a very long time. A very long time, at least 10 years, maybe more than 10 years. And I picked it up, I think in a book swap at a Girl Guides group when I was a teenager, and it's just sat on my shelves ever since, and I've never been that fussed about reading it. And I didn't even realise when I got Days Without End that I actually already owned something else by this author, and then I loved Days Without End, and I suddenly started researching more about Sebastian Barry and suddenly realised he'd also written this book that was sat on my shelves, and it's another historical fiction novel I believe, so, you know, need to get to this one soon. Then next on my list is Jessie Burton. I read The Miniaturist at the beginning of 2018 and adored it. Another one that will definitely be appearing on my favourite books of 2018 video, one I really loved and I thought was written fantastically. I really must read more by Jessie Burton. She has another novel called The Muse, and I believe there's also like a Christmas novella or middle grade novel called The 12 Dancing Princesses. I think it might be The 10 Dancing Princesses, but you know what I mean. That one and The Muse I definitely need to read at some point in the future, because I love The Miniaturist so much. I thought her writing and her kind of general way of doing historical fiction was just wonderful. And next I have Eleanor Catton. This is The Luminaries, which was my favourite book of 2016? I think 2016 it would have been 2016. I loved The Luminaries hugely. It's a huge book and I loved it hugely. It's a wonderful read, so rich, so fantastic. And Eleanor Catton has another novel. I haven't read her other novel, and I really need to. I don't think it's anything like The Luminaries. I hear it's very different, but I really need to read it because I love this so much and I just want to get my hands on more of her amazing work. Next on my list is Jonathan Coe. Jonathan Coe is another writer that I've read a few things by, but not for quite a while. I've read What a Carve Up, I've read The Rotters Club, and I've read The Rain Before It Falls. I studied What a Carve Up by Jonathan Coe at university and absolutely loved it. After that I bought a few more of his books. I read The Rotters Club and The Rain Before It Falls within a year of What a Carve Up, and then I just haven't read anything else by him since. I have this sat on my shelf, number 11, where it's been for 3 years since it came out. I got a proof copy when I was working at Foyles, because that's how long ago it was. It was a long time ago that I worked at Foyles. And I really need to read it. And just more by him. He's got a new book out this year as well, I believe, which I want to read, but I feel like I need to read this first as it's sat on my shelf. I love Jonathan Coe's writing style. I loved What a Carve Up so much, and The Rain Before It Falls is just beautiful. Like, that's where I'd recommend starting with his work, I think, because it's less experimental and less angry than What a Carve Up. It's a really, really beautiful, touching, lovely story, The Rain Before It Falls, really fantastic. But What a Carve Up as well is amazing. It's so good. It's really crazy and weird, but fantastic. But I just need to read more by him, so a number 11 and many more things are on my TBR for Jonathan Coe. Next I have Esi Edugyan. I read Washington Black earlier on this year. This was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize 2018 and is an absolutely brilliant, wonderful read. Such a fascinating adventure following the life of a runaway slave and kind of everything that happens to him. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. Really, really well crafted with a sort of perfect balance in its storytelling and hard-hitting themes, but also like a feeling of hope and adventure running throughout it, which I just loved. This author has one other book which is called The Half-Blood Blues, and I really, really want to try and get to it at some point in the next year or two because I loved Washington Black so, so much. Next I have Patrick Gale. Earlier on this year I read A Place Called Winter, and it's another book that will certainly be on my top books of 2018 list. I absolutely loved this. A really wonderful historical fiction novel, so well written, so well researched, really engaging and just beautiful and moving throughout. I definitely need to read more by Patrick Gale. So on my shelves I have Take Nothing With You, which is his latest book, which sounds incredible. It's all about music, which is a theme I love in books, as well as about memory, another thing I love in books. He looks at a man who is in hospital having treatment for cancer, and in order to have this treatment he needs to be kind of locked in a room on his own for 48 hours, and as he is in that room he starts reflecting on his life, his kind of learning to play the cello as a child and discovering his sexuality as a teenager and just like all of the stuff in his life. It just sounds amazing. I'm so excited. I'm very, very excited. This must be a priority for 2019, like really early on, because it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. And just everything else by Patrick Gale. He's one of those authors I've only read one thing by, but I know I'm gonna have to read everything by him at some point. Rough Music sounds brilliant, and like so many others. I'm very excited for all the Patrick Gale. Next on my list is Suji. Now Suji is another author that I've read quite a few things by, but not for a while. As a teenager, Suji, along with Diane Setterfield and Kate Morton, who I'll talk about in a minute, Suji was one of the very few contemporary writers who I read as a teenager. I read Reading in Bed, I read Earth and Heaven, I read The Mysteries of Glass. I feel like there's another one that I've forgotten that I read, and I'd have to go back to my parents' house and look at my mum's bookshelves to work out what it was. And I read those as a teenager and absolutely loved them. And then last year I also read her book Last Fling, which is a short story collection which I absolutely loved and was one of my favourite books of last year. So I definitely need to read more by Suji, but it's just taken me a while to properly get back into reading more by her. I know Trio is supposed to be good, and my mum has like a whole host of Suji books sat on her shelf, so definitely Suji is an author I need to read more by in 2019. Next on my list I have Rachel Joyce. I read The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry shortly after it came out and really, really enjoyed it. I then read her little collection of Christmas short stories, The Snow Garden, which was fantastic, and then I haven't read anything else by her since. I know there is The Love Song of Queenie Hennessy. I don't know if I feel as inclined to pick that one up because I don't know whether I feel that that was needed from Harold Fry, but I've also heard really, really good things about it. And then she also has two other books, I believe, Perfect and The Music Shop, which I hear are really, really good. I think my dad's read them as well. I just really, really need to read more by Rachel Joyce because she's definitely my kind of writer and writes my kind of books that I really, really love. So yeah, she's definitely on my list and I need to read more by her. Next I have Celeste Ng. I read Everything I Never Told You in November and oh my goodness, it was fantastic. Definitely a highlight of this year. A really wonderful book. And one of those books where you start reading and you're like, this is not just the book that is brilliant, this is the author. This writing style is what I like. It reminded me of Emily St. John Mandel, and it was like the most excited about a writing style I had been since I first picked up an Emily St. John Mandel novel. So definitely need to read more by Celeste Ng. She only has one other novel out, and that is Little Fires Everywhere, which I also hear really good things about. So hopefully I will definitely be picking that up in 2019 and I'm very excited about it. Next on my list I have David Mitchell. I read Cloud Atlas quite a while ago. I think while I was doing my masters, I'm gonna say, so it would have been about 4 years ago. That's scary. And I really, really loved it. It's definitely a real favourite of mine. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's just taken me a long time to read anything more by him since. I have read one other book by him, and that is The Bone Clocks, which I picked up last year, but I just didn't love The Bone Clocks. I just didn't love it. I liked the first half, and then it slowly got less and less good for me, and that's kind of put me off. However, I do have Slate House sat on my shelves, and I also have this, which I'm especially excited for. This is The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet, which Nick has read. Nick's read much more David Mitchell than me, and he says that he thinks this would be my favourite one. And I believe it's set in 18th century Japan, which that's going to appeal to me. History, 18th, 19th century, and Japan. I'm very excited for that. It sounds wonderful, and I just definitely need to read more by David Mitchell, so this is definitely on my list for next year. Next on my list I have Kate Morton. As I said, Suji and Kate Morton and Diane Setterfield were a few of the only writers who I used to read as a teenager. I read The House at the Riverton and The Forgotten Garden when I was a teenager and completely fell in love with them. I adore these books so much. I still have such a love in my heart for The House at the Riverton and The Forgotten Garden. They're such brilliant, amazing books. And yeah, I haven't read anything by Kate Morton for ages, and I really, really must. She's got a new book out recently called The Clockmaker's Daughter, which sounds amazing. She's also written The Lake House and The Distant Hours, all of which sound incredible. I just really, really need to pick up more by her. So in 2019, I'm going to be going to the library and getting out some Kate Morton. Next, I have Natasha Pulley. She is another newer find for me. The Watchmaker of Filigree Street is a contender for my favourite book of the year, definitely. One I read back in April this year and absolutely fell in love with. It's a neo-Victorian novel with a touch of magic, a touch of Japanese culture, and just like everything I like to be in a book. It was amazing, it was incredible. I'm still so excited and reading from this book. And I have on my shelves the Bedlam Stacks, which I bought in May, just after reading The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, intending to read it immediately, and then was afraid in case it wasn't as good. So I really, really need to pick this up, hopefully towards the beginning of 2019. I'm sure it will be fantastic too. I trust her writing style a lot, and yeah, I can't wait for it. And then my penultimate author, I have Catherine and Valente. Another real favourite of this year has been Radiance, which was just a really wonderful, dynamic, exciting, very, very different read. It's a kind of space opera about filmmaking, told through a very unusual structure. And it's just amazing and so interesting and clever, and like I really don't understand how Catherine and Valente pulled this off, because there is so much in this book and it's so complicated and so many issues are being dealt with, and somehow she pulls it off spectacularly, and it's just engaging and beautiful and poignant and emotional and just amazing throughout. I love this a lot, and I definitely need to read more by her. She's written a lot of books, including her middle grade series, which begins with The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. I think that's the right title. I hear that one's very good, but also she's written a lot more adult books that I need to read as well, so I just definitely need to read more by her in the future, and very excited to get to more of her work. Finally on my list I have Sarah Waters. I've read 2 books by her, Fingersmith and Tipping the Velvet, and I loved them both. These are both set in Victorian London and both look at queer women kind of navigating their own sexuality and also the kind of complications of the Victorian class system. Both incredibly brilliant, and I can't wait to read more of her work. I know she's one of those authors I want to read everything by. The only other book I have by her sitting on my shelf is Affinity, which I believe is her only other book set in the Victorian times. I think the others are set a bit later. Don't hear Affinity spoken about that much, but I definitely want to read it. I also hear great things said about The Little Stranger, so that's definitely on my list as well. So there we have it. Those are all the authors that I want to read more by quite soon. Quite a long list, I know, but there we go. Please let me know down in the comments if you have any suggestions of where to go next with any of these authors' works, if there's anything you've read by them that you'd especially recommend. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.